Hello, everyone. It's Harley Seelbinder. Welcome to the Harley Seelbinder podcast, and I have with me Nathan Wenke, the great and powerful.
Oh, the all great and powerful.
Yeah. So, who
Awesome.
are you, Nate? And how do you know me? And what do you do? And
Good questions.
yeah,
Well, I live about 10 feet in that direction, so I'm kind of stuck with you. But what do I do? Let's see. I'm a junior at Western, studying civil engineering. Um, and I also run a lawn care business in town that I started roughly 4 years ago. You can say five, but it kind of depends on how you choose to time that particular one. Um, but yeah, I'm a junior at Western. I got about a year and a half left. We'll see. It might be 2 years. We'll see how quickly we can get done here. But no, staying busy. How did I meet you? We could do that one.
sure.
Well, let's see. I've been stuck with you since fifth grade, something like that.
Yeah,
I say we probably weren't good friends though until freshman year of high school, I'd say. And then we played soccer for 4 years. So,
yeah.
and then I don't know. I'd say over high school, I think we became closer. I think it's fair to say.
We did
Um,
common values of like trying to do well in school, also just have a few other axioms along with high school. Just having a
Yeah.
full day, a full life. You
Yeah.
could connect in those ways.
for sure. And we were both not as interested in the I don't know high school life. Let's say we were both kind of ready to. I don't know if move on is the right word, but grow up, explore different things. I think we both saw the potential outside of the confines of high school, and were attracted to it in a good way. I think it's fair to say.
Yeah.
So
We were both experiencing the real world, solving real world problems after high school, like after our high school day, and we were just like, I was just like, I I enjoy this way more than sitting in this confined room, and we could kind of bond over that. Whereas it seemed like a
yeah,
lot of people around us were like really enjoying that environment, and for some reason it wasn't my favorite environment. But we're out of there, and we've learned a lot from that
yeah,
experience, and yeah.
we certainly have. We certainly have. And this is the thing: is we were both running businesses at the time. You had a different role than I did, obviously,
Hmm.
in your particular business, but I don't know, that kind of changes your perspective on things.
It
And
does.
it's one of the things that we could kind of relate with each other on, and I think that was huge. So
Definitely.
that's interesting.
Yeah.
Um, I don't know. I could talk a little bit about why am I Western, I suppose.
Sure, yeah.
Sure.
Let's talk about it.
I mean, you can get into that too, I suppose. That's probably something to talk about. But um, in terms of how I ended up at Western and why I picked engineering are all very complicated questions. But I can give a summarized version here. Um, so it's we ask 18-year-olds, hey, go pick, go make $120,000 or more decision about what you want to do the rest of your life, and there I get to a certain degree why we push 18-year-olds to decide these kind of things, but I don't know about you, but I didn't know jack crap when I was 18, and I'm not claiming I do now either, but especially then, I didn't know anything about the world.
Or about yourself.
Oh, yeah, yeah. You don't know anything about yourself. So I like to think that I was trying to know more and that I was making an effort to do so, which I think is more than a lot of people, but um, it no, you just don't know what you want to do. So a couple things narrowed it down for me personally. One of which was that I was extremely analytical, good at math, problem solving kind of mindset. I liked numbers to a certain degree. So it kind of the engineering route was the obvious route, I'd say, and for you too, I think to a large degree it kind of was.
Yeah.
Um, we both had interests in different things, and I did too. Like I was more interested in psychology, philosophy, um, even finance and stuff like that. But I couldn't. Obviously, it was a tricky calculation, but I couldn't justify spending 120,000 or more, frankly, with grad school on, a psychology PhD or a philosophy PhD, because majors in those fields really don't have any economic weight. And unfortunately, you do have to focus on those factors, which, it's just kind of part of life. So as much as I would have wanted to go in that direction, I don't think it would have made economic or logical sense. Or even from a passion standpoint, I couldn't justify the 8 years of schooling or more, um, for something that I thought I could simply have a passion for on the side. It didn't need to be my sole focus in life. So,
Yeah, and you can still philosophize with yourself, ask these deep questions, talk with me, talk with your close friends and family about these deep ideas, and you don't need a degree necessarily to
exactly,
speak on these. So it's a
exactly.
good analysis you made. I agree. And it's a 4 year route instead of an 8 year route, and
Yeah,
then you have that piece of paper, and that piece of paper looks good.
no, it does for sure. So there's definitely more complexity there, but
Hmm.
yeah, it's not an easy decision for sure. What you're gonna do and what route you're gonna go. So I'm not saying I made the right decision, but so far it seems to be going fairly well, and we'll continue to push on.
Yeah,
So yeah, yeah, for sure.
I would say to anyone who's trying to decide which college to go to, I'd say a few of the biggest factors to look for would probably be the financial. Are you going to go into deep debt to go to this college or to do this degree? Or are you passionate about it? Like, can you see yourself doing it? I recommend taking personality tests, one specifically by Jordan Peterson called Understand Myself. I could throw that link in the description, but I recommend that to anyone who's looking to understand who they are and what environments help them yield the best version of themselves. And so that really helped. And I wish I would have done that back in the day, but so I'm just telling to anyone who's younger and deciding. It's a good idea.
No, for sure, for sure. And obviously, you still won't, even if you take that test, even if you, dive deep into who you are as a person, you're never going to fully understand yourself, especially at 18.
No.
But knowing some basic things about yourself is huge. And, whether you're high in extroversion or low, because something like that can be a big factor in a career choice. Do you want to be surrounded by people all day? Or do you want to be surrounded by, things and gadgets and widgets, and that's more the engineering route? And it's it's important to know those things, because you can end up pursuing something for multiple years that you realize at the end that you hate. And, you know, there's no way to perfectly predict and perfectly choose, what you want to do. So you're going to make mistakes, and that's fine. But there is things that you can do, like that personality test, that really help kind of, I don't know, give you insight into your inner workings, I'd say, and kind of what drives you. So that was useful for me. I'm trying to remember when you took it. It was in college, wasn't
Yeah, I was in college. I didn't take it
it?
till I was already cemented into a degree in some
Uh,
sense.
uh,
But yeah.
yeah, no, that's a good thing. So,
Hmm. And college isn't for everyone either. There's a ton of different routes you can take, and you can make money online, and you can go into trade school, and there's just if you just start working at a place and consistently and work hard, you're gonna succeed too. So college isn't always the option, but it is important for some. So yeah. Well, and so Nate, one
okay,
thing
okay.
that I learned from your dad in going to your house over
Yep,
all these years.
yep,
Well, let's
yep.
quick back up. Your dad happens to be a pastor at the Bridge Church.
Yes, he does. He does
And
indeed.
what does he do there?
What does
Quick
he
little.
do? Well, what do pastors do?
Yeah.
He solves people's problems, is more or less what he does.
Yeah.
Um, well, I mean, you see the pastor, preaching up on up on the podium on Sundays, and that is part of his job. But I'd say the primary part of his job is to counsel and lead people through their lives. And I mean, it's complicated. It's meaningful. It's it's difficult sometimes, but I think he does it quite well. But yeah, he does a lot of that. He does a lot of counseling, a lot of meetings about next steps, about movements, about what to talk about, what to preach about, where's the church going, that kind of stuff. So
Yeah.
he's frankly, he would be the one to ask, what do you do all
Oh
day?
yeah,
Because he
I
does many a things, but
yeah I will. I'll definitely try to have him on
one
to
day, one
talk.
day we'll get him on here.
But yeah, I feel like I've learned a lot from him just going to lunch with you guys
Oh
and coming
yeah.
over after church or spending the night and talking. One thing I realized about him is that he'll just he'll ask deep questions to you about your life, about your goals,
Yep.
about who you are or what you want to do, and he really makes you think. And one lesson that I he told to me and to Nate was that if you when looking at a person, if they ask questions, that's an indication that they are of probably more quality than someone who doesn't. So I've been I've been trying my best to ask more questions in general to people because when I show that I am interested in someone's life and they need to talk about it and they can to me and I can listen and encourage, it seems like it really it's a positive impact on their life. And so
Oh yeah.
that's something that has been ingrained in my brain about when I look at people and if they're asking any questions that I really look up to them a lot. And that's something that's stuck with me and Nate. Like when I feel like I almost think about it too much. When I meet someone new, I'm just analyzing to see if they ask questions, and I'm asking them a lot of questions. But that's one thing that I learned from Jeff. Ask lots of questions.
No, for sure, for sure. And it has to do kind of, it's interesting, we can even back up a step.
Yeah.
When you're leaving a high school environment and going into a college environment, there is a bit of a growing up process. And one of the things that was absolutely hammered into me my senior year of high school, which was more of a personal journey than anything, was that life is inherently complicated. Very, very complicated. And it was interesting because, you go to learn about something new, right? So you're like, okay, I'll go read a book on this given philosophical topic or economics or whatever it happens to be. And you think, okay, I'll go learn something about the subject. And the primary thing that you learn the second you open that book is that you don't actually know anything. That you're overwhelmed by just the quantity and complexity of the information that's in front of you. And it's an immensely humbling experience, but it kind of changes your mindset on things. And in terms of how you approach that reality with people around you, um, one of Peterson's rules actually is assume the person you're talking to knows something that you don't, which is an incredible, let's say, basis to start a conversation with. Um, and it's true also because they most definitely do. They've lived a different life. They have different experiences. Everyone has something to bring to the table. Um, so, you know, you're talking about asking questions. Even farther back from that is this idea of how do you approach a conversation and what is the best way to approach a person that you're talking to. And a posture of humility with interest, wanting to know the truth, um, has produced some of the most meaningful and interesting conversations I've ever had with people. And the asking questions rule is kind of it's similar to the assuming the person that you're talking to knows something you don't. It's the same psychology, same value, for sure. Um, and I've found that I've had immensely meaningful conversations with a lot of different people, and primarily because you just start asking questions. And you know, a lot of people articulate their thoughts out loud through their answers, and they don't always know. You would never know what they were thinking without that question, I guess is what I'm getting at. So um, that can produce all sorts of interesting results and interesting conversations once you do that. So I think that's been hammered into both of us over the past couple of years,
Definitely.
and as you mentioned, maybe a little too much at times.
Sometimes, yeah.
We're probably too quick to um, get annoyed with a person if we feel like all they're doing is talking and not asking us any questions. And that's it. It's an interesting. It can be a slippery slope, of course, but it it's that whole reciprocity idea. It's like, well, give and take. Well, how much are you showing interest in their lives and how much are they showing interest in your life. And if it's one-sided, especially for a long period of time, stuff just isn't as interesting. It's just not as meaningful. And it I don't want to say it's a litmus test, but it is interesting to see how that dynamic plays out with people, especially when you first meet them. And I don't know, we've observed that a lot. But it's also been really useful because it's helped us in a lot of relationships. I don't know if you would agree.
Sure, yeah, definitely. I when Jeff first brought that up and you brought that to my attention a few years ago, I was so
Sure.
blind to the whole idea that asking questions was so important. Like, if someone were to ask, why is asking questions important, I really wouldn't know the answer. But I've thought about it a lot, and before I write people off these days, I have the perspective of they just might not realize the power and that asking questions brings, and how that really makes a person a better person. And so this is why I'm trying to have this episode, to try to explain to people, like, I feel like the asking of questions, the recognition of all the complexity out there, and the recognition that you are so ignorant and that you really don't know that much. All three of those things combined truly make life way more interesting, and I feel like you grow very quickly as a person. You learn so many things, you form deeper relationships. So I'm just trying to encourage everyone to start thinking about, if they ask questions, like, ask questions to your dad, ask questions to your mom. Just start asking more and more questions. When in class, if you don't understand something, ask. It's so useful, and it's really useful for the people that are being asked, because they might not expect to be asked, and they don't really know what they think, and then you put them on the spot a little bit. You ask them, and then they really have to start thinking, and in their thinking, they can cement ideas in their brain that they didn't have before, and they grow as well. So it's really just useful for all parties when questions are being asked. And I don't know if you're ever in a social situation that just feels like it's draining you. Like, you're trying your best to ask questions, and the other person might talk a little bit or talk a lot, and then just kind of end, and then you just kind of feel drained. Like, you don't want to put as much energy into this conversation because it's getting tiring. Whereas the dichotomy of that versus when you're in a discussion and there's just multiple questions being asked, where, oh, really, that's an interesting perspective. Why do you think that? Or just the asking of questions truly, to me, makes that discussion way more energizing, interesting. The connection becomes way deeper, and it's so memorable. And so, yeah, I can't hammer down enough how important asking questions is. Like, we could talk about it for hours, but so, yeah, that's been really influential in my life, just thinking about questions.
No, for sure. And we can even take one step back in a different direction as to why we're here currently discussing this on your podcast.
Yeah.
And kind of the approach to that. And one of the hesitancies I think you and I both had in terms of starting one of these, and you pulled the trigger on it, which kudos to you, was that I think we were like going right directly to this very topic, is we just realized we just didn't know anything. Is that we were skeptical of our ability to articulate complex things and actually, give out some kind of wisdom, let's say. And although that's a legitimate fear, I think it was partially because we were just, again, overwhelmed by the complexity of things. And but you don't know until you try. You don't know what could be useful to some people and what couldn't. You have to be a fool before you can be a master. You have to stumble about stupidly and say stupid things before you can get at the truth. And I think that's what we're trying to do. And I'd say it's one of the main things I try to do in life, is find the truth. And one of the ways to do that is to have a conversation, and starting from a place of recognizing the complexity in the world and in the topic that we're talking about, assuming then that the other person knows something that you don't. So you're coming from a place of humility, and you're assuming the other person has something to bring to the table, which is the correct assumption, and helps lead the conversation in a productive manner. So you start with those premises, and you don't know what can happen. You don't know what you'll solve. You don't know what complexity you'll get into, and that's kind of my hope for this and for you, and the conversations you'll have, because that that recognition of complexity coupled with conversations, who knows what that will bring. So that's pretty exciting, and I think that will be very meaningful. But it is, I can't hammer this point enough, that we just don't know. There's just such complexity in life, and one of my, let's say, fears of even talking on a recorded podcast is that I'm constantly updating my opinions on things. I'm constantly learning new things, and I don't want to say something stupid. And because I'm so aware of the fact that I'm going to say stupid things inherently, because we're all flawed, I can be more hesitant sometimes to engage in something like this. But I'm excited about it, and I think it will be immensely meaningful for hopefully the years to come.
Yeah.
We'll see what happens in that.
Mm-hmm.
But I just want to kind of lay out the framework, because hopefully I'll be on here a couple more times.
Yeah.
And I can have strong opinions about things, but within the framework that I outlined before, of trying to be humble in terms of my recognition of how much I don't know, but also seeking for the truth and wanting to find out what's correct, or at least getting closer to what's true, because it's difficult to ever fully comprehend the ultimate truth, because we're not divine, unfortunately, or fortunately, depending on how you look at it. But that kind of is the goal, and I think it will. I think we'll see. So
Yeah.
but it's important to start from that place of humility, and yeah, we'll see, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
So it's kind of
certainly.
Yeah.
One verse that I really like is Proverbs 9:10, and
Yep.
it goes as, "The fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom," and that can be interpreted in multiple different ways.
Sure.
But the way that I view it is that when you realize that complexity and your ignorance, and you realize that something above knows way more than us, something we can't even understand knows way more than us, and we know such a sliver of what there is. In recognizing that and realizing that you just barely know anything, you then start to question everything. You start to look into everything. You start to research. You start to play devil's advocate on your own thoughts. You start to you try to nuance your view on things. Realize that there's two sides to each story. And in doing so, in that wrestling and in that search, I feel like you become wiser, because you weren't as ignorant as before.
Certainly.
You become a little less ignorant. And in that approach of humility and recognition of complexity, you just grow as a person. And so that the wisest people in the world are the people who say that they don't know things, and are the people who ask people what they think. So that verse to me really, really is impactful. So, and some people might read that verse differently, but that's how I kind of interpret it, and that's how it helps me live my life. So, yeah.
Yeah. No, for sure. For sure. I fully agree with what you just said. So.
And another goal of this podcast is to find the truth and see what is true. But an interesting thing is, we have to define what truth is. What do we mean by true? And there's few different ways we can talk about what that means, because that even is complex, talking about that. And do you want to get into that?
I mean, we can. I can. Oh man, I mean, we can. No, let's do it. Let's dabble a little bit. I think I'll lay out. You want me to?
Sure.
I can lay out the two I don't know, the two different ways of looking at what is true, and one would be a pragmatic lens, and one would be a scientific rationalist lens. And we'll see if I can articulate this correctly. But the classic example to illustrate the point of pragmatism versus, we'll call it scientific rationalism or empiricism. It kind of depends on how you want to classify it. Is an example of a loaded gun in terms of how you're supposed to treat it. So it is the rule, I'd say, with gun safety, which is that you always assume the weapon that you're handling is loaded. So even when you know, rationally, literally, scientifically, empirically, that that gun is not loaded, pragmatically, you treat it as if it is, because the outcome that will be produced by treating it as if it is, from a pragmatic standpoint, is always superior, because you're hedging against the possibility that you're going to make a mistake. So even though you know literally it's not loaded, you pragmatically do something, and pragmatism roughly can be defined as, the pursuit of what's useful, more or less. So from a pragmatic perspective, that actually is superior. That's a superior kind of truth, in a sense, even though it's not literally true. But the outcome you produce is better than an outcome where you only focus on it being literally true. So that's just a perfect example of how truth is not a static thing. It's not a simple thing. And then another interesting way of thinking about it is that there's something called a black truth. You can wield truth as a weapon. You can, expose a 5-year-old to war movies, and although in a technical sense those movies are a true, capture of what happened, at least as best as we can, that's too much complexity and, let's call it, reality for that 5-year-old, and that would be a misuse of something that is, technically true. You could do the same thing with someone that you care about, is you could put too much, too much truth in their face. Let's say someone is just trying to work out and physically better themselves. Well, if you attack them too much with who they are right now, and attack them for even trying, even though it's literally true that they're not doing well at the moment, then they'll just stop. So there has to be a level of encouragement, there has to be a level of recognition of where you could be, and then that's a more pragmatic reading of what is true. So going back to the gun example, that's the classic example between pragmatism and literal scientific empiricism. But within those two types of truths, or let's call them camps of truth, there's just immense complexity, but both of them are good tools to use when approaching a problem of what is true, or is this truly true. But I guess I wanted to outline that because it helps to illustrate just how complex truth is. And I mean, we didn't even touch on metaphysics, and we didn't even touch in the religious dimension, but it's one thing to talk about, an example of a gun. It's another thing to talk about what's true in regards to, the Christian God. That's a whole nother discussion, which should be answered in books, but
That's not even enough.
that's not even enough. But I don't know. I always found that example useful.
Yeah.
I don't know if you thought that was.
That's a good example.
It's a classic one. So
Yeah. Another example that comes to mind is people can have this perspective of, well, no one's going to know in 1,000 years, so what does it really matter if I try today or not, or if I try my best right now, or
sure.
what does it really matter, because no one's going to know in those 1,000 years. And technically speaking, you might be right. Like, not many people will really know if you're going to do something good or bad today, or like, you can play that game where you extend the timeline and say, oh, no one's going to care or know in that amount of time, which might be true, but what does that do to your psyche? What does that do to your attitude on life? What does that do to your actions? What does that do to your relationships? In my opinion, I do not think that's a useful or pragmatic approach to life, saying, "Oh, what's it going to matter in 20,000 years? And they will never know." It's like, no, you switch that, you flip that on its head and say, well, everything matters, and every single thing I do impacts the ones around me, and it's very, very important. And even though we can't prove that these actions in the present are really going to make such butterfly effects into the years in the future, all we can do is try our best, because the the analysis and conclusion which states, "Oh, nothing matters in life. Who cares what you do?" That only provides suffering, from what I can tell.
Yeah.
When I had that attitude of nothing matters, what I do doesn't matter, oh, why should I try? That nihilistic attitude, just, it made my life a living hell in some sense.
Oh, yeah.
And it made my relationships less deep. And I realized, like, flipping that on its head, everything matters instead of nothing matters, because you don't even know. Everything might matter, and if it does, you better be trying your best, because every single thing you say to someone, every single look you give, it might be truly important. And in my eyes, it is useful to think that it does matter, because it brings such meaning to your life. So
for sure.
that's another example that I see.
Yeah, and of course, you applied pragmatism versus a rationalistic, scientific view of your life, and I mean that's the key right there. I mean, that's, if we're going to apply it to anything, that's the ultimate question to a certain extent, is how should you live? And I'm sure we'll get into that a bunch, but it is interesting to use that and to play that game of pragmatism and rationalism. And you pointed out something which I experienced a lot, which is it's extremely easy to rationalize all the meaning out of your life, or at least for me. I think some people don't do that quite as readily, but I'm extremely high in analytical problem-solving personality traits, let's say, and very high in I don't know, a rationalistic approach to problems, and I think that's ingrained into me to a certain degree. But there's a downside of that you pointed out, which is it can become, it's a powerful tool, but wrongly applied, especially in terms of the meaning of your life, it can be a black truth, as we kind of outlined before, where the consequences of approaching life with a hyper rationalistic lens is nothing but more suffering and catastrophe. And of course, with all things, it's nuanced. It's not quite that simple. But I know you had that realization to a certain degree, and not speaking for you, but I think I had it sooner and in a more stark way, maybe, let's say. But no, I think Peterson kind of outlined that for both of us. I'd say it's probably true. That whether life has inherent meaning and what you should do about it and how you live your life and those kind of questions. But do you want me to go into my own personal journey in that dimension? We could.
Sure. One thing before you go.
Yeah, go.
Just another example of what is true and how to use truth. Just thinking in your relationships with the people that you care deeply about. Let's say they say something to you that isn't true, or they are acting in a way that you feel like isn't the wisest, or they could be doing better. Instead of being a yes man and agreeing with them, which might feel useful in the present, where it's like, oh, I don't want to have a conflict right now. Oh, I'm just gonna let them be.
Sure.
I don't feel like arguing. It's not worth fighting about. And sometimes when you do that, you're not being true to your friend in some sense.
Oh, yeah.
You aren't giving them that little bit of tough love that they might need. Like, if you said something stupid to me, I might say, Nate, I don't think that's very smart.
Yeah.
Like, because we have such a connection, and I care so much about what's true, I might say something in a loving way that's truthful, not trying to wield a black truth on you, trying to
sure.
slice your legs out, but I'm going to give you a little flick of truth to kind of keep you on your path. And I feel like that's really important too in your relationships, because you have to find the balance between harsh and truthful, and then compassionate and loving. And
Oh yeah.
and it's a tricky balance, and no one strikes the balance correctly always. But that's always something to look into too, because to me, the love is the combination of truth and love. To love someone truly, you need that
Sure.
truth along with love, and that's just another thing that I've realized where you can't always just be a yes man with your friends, because how much of a friend are you when you're just agreeing with everything they
Yeah.
say?
Yeah.
And it's interesting when you talk with people and they actually do disagree, and I feel like the discussions that I have where someone disagrees with me, I feel like I learn way more, and I'm not in that echo chamber of yeah, agree. It's interesting when you can find people who are willing to disagree with you and are willing to raise truth above the potential for disagreement, and I find that very important as well.
Oh yeah, for
and
sure.
So just finding that balance is interesting. And
Oh yeah, and we have this funny relationship with being wrong, and we tend to think of being wrong as a bad thing, and it's actually I try, and obviously I fail in this regard, but when, it's one of the best things in the world sometimes to be wrong, because if you're wrong and you can figure out why, then you can be right. You can update your viewpoint of reality and suddenly live in a more real world and live in a more truthful world. And it's this funny relationship. People say, I don't want to be wrong about something, and they'll argue something to death. Especially in today. Today, people just nuance and complexity just were thrown out the window a while ago. But one of the interesting things is that when you're in a conversation and you're approaching it from that place of humility, and you realize that you've missed something, or someone points out something that you've done wrong, or had an error in, is there's two approaches to that. One is to refuse to update your worldview, to refuse to accept the truth, or to accept it and update your worldview. And um, you'll find that in that you realize the complexity in things, you realize how much you don't know, but then you're also getting closer to what is true, and you're living in reality, and reality is a lot better to live in than not reality, because reality always wins in the end. So that's interesting too, in terms of conversations and being wrong, because we have this weird relationship with being wrong, and it's not that I don't get it, it's just that trying to switch that mindset in a conversation is huge. It's just huge. It can completely change the conversation. So
certainly,
anyway, because then you can solve the problem. If you don't know why you're wrong, you can't solve the problem. And in relationships too, that's a big one. Finding out what you're doing wrong so that you can fix it. Because if it isn't discussed, if it isn't articulated, there's no way to solve the problem. So
certainly,
it's a tricky negotiation, but
yeah.
I found that to be true as well.
And
So
one example that comes to mind when talking about this is this play called The Cocktail Party by
yes.
T.S. Eliot. It's something that Nate
excellent
and I
play.
talk about all the time.
Yeah, we do.
I think I learned it from Peterson over there, and it's this idea where this woman is at this party, and there happens to be this psychologist or counselor right there, and she's kind of just laying out some of her problems to him, and at the end of all of that, she's like, well, I want you to tell me there's something wrong with me. I really hope that you can find something wrong with my perspective.
Yep.
And when I first heard that, I was like, whoa, she hopes that he finds something wrong with what she's saying. And I was just, it boggled my mind. And I was like, what? And then she was like, yeah, because if I'm wrong and I'm the problem and my interpretation is the problem, then I can update that, like you're saying.
Yeah, you can fix it.
I can improve. It's an optimistic thing.
Exactly.
It's not pessimistic at all. It's, wow, I have things I can improve, and I can. Whereas if it's the world, then
you're screwed.
Yeah.
I'm suffering horribly, but it's my fault. It's like, well, that's incredibly optimistic, because if it's the world's fault, if it's reality, if it's situations around you that are outside of the bounds of your control, you're done for. You're screwed. But if it's your fault, or at least even if an aspect of it is your fault, even if part of it is, then you can at least try to address that part.
And that brings all the power to you in that situation. And it's incredibly empowering in a good way, and that you can actually solve it. So it's a completely, like you're talking about, it's just a different worldview. It's a different way to look at conversations, complexity, problems, all that kind of stuff. And I think for you and I, it's been immensely useful and immensely powerful and, frankly, life-changing in terms of how to look at the world. And I think within this entire discussion, that axiom of assuming that you can be wrong and that you can update your view and find the truth has been a central axiom that we've found very useful, I think would be fair to say. So that's been immensely useful.
Yeah.
Um,
So you said you wanted to dive into your experience, your personal experience.
yeah, well, you kind of not that you switch topics, but you kind of
added a little complexity to the past topic a little bit.
which is excellent. It just it depends on how deep we want to go here and how much time we have. But it's one thing to talk about pragmatism in terms of a gun. It's another thing to talk about pragmatism in terms of your life and your nihilistic journey and how you got out of that and in terms of life, because that gets into the religious dimension, that gets into meaning, purpose, why you should live life, should you, good and evil. So we can dabble. I don't what time are we at?
Well, we have another 15 minutes.
Okay. Well, then I might want to save that.
We'll save that for another time.
Because that one is, I think, an episode in and of itself. Although we say that, and it's like each one of these things can be an episode in and of itself. But that one particularly, I'd like to save. So at least we can go down all sorts of roads with that one. But
yeah. Well, to close this,
sure.
How about this question? What are your goals in having these discussions? Okay. As we continue these discussions, what are your goals maybe this next year or two? Like, what do you want to see happen? And, yeah.
For sure. Well, I think you, in your intro, you kind of outlined some of those pretty good, and I would concur with a lot of them. One is actually somewhat a selfish goal in a sense, which selfishness isn't inherently bad, by the way, people. But having a record of improvement, having a record of what I used to think and say, having a literal recording of my thoughts, not only to reflect upon, but to improve upon and see how far I've come, or hopefully not the opposite, but how far, what the journey has brought us to, is immensely useful. And that's a very attractive idea. I have a horrible memory, personally. And I know there's so many conversations that you have in life that's like, if you don't in some way journal or have some kind of a record of them, you'll forget about them. And I think that alone as a reason is sufficient, So that's huge. That's a huge goal. I guess it's part of the goal and part of the reason as to why. So that I'm really looking forward to in this forum. But goal, specify a little bit more. So goal with the podcast,
goal personally, and then goal in the world. Like what do you want to see happen as we talk?
Okay, within this environment. Okay, because there's my life goals, which are kind of a different subject in and of themselves, but within this forum, yeah. So the record keeping, in a sense, the ability to reflect, that's huge. But I think in our conversations about nuance and complexity, I think the primary goal is to find truth, and to find truth within the bounds of nuance and complexity, because they inherently bind truth, not in a bad way, but in a real way. And understanding just how complicated things are, one of the best ways to flush out that complexity and find the truth is through a open discussion about it. And that in and of itself is something that we do regardless. It doesn't have to be on a podcast or recorded. But that specifically in the structured form of a podcast, the structured form of a conversation, I think will really help to facilitate that seeking of truth and that flushing out of complexity. So I'm looking forward to that, and engaging in that, because one brief point here about thinking is that it's difficult to think internally and create a nuanced, complicated perspective, because it's easy it's hard to hedge against your own biases within your head. So it's much harder to be constantly questioning what you're thinking within your own self, versus in a verbal conversation with someone else. That's the advantage of them being there, is they kind of do that for you, is they can point out when you're missing something, or wrong about something, or lacking complexity in one area. And that's immensely useful in and of itself, for finding the truth. So that conversation setup is just huge. So I mean, that I'm really excited about, as well.
One thing that's interesting to me is that what we're saying, people can hold us accountable for. It's not just us. Like, we can hold each other accountable. But
Sure.
there's people out there that might listen to this, and hopefully they might comment, or they might message us and say, hey, what you said here was wrong, or not that smart, or what you said here was really useful. And to have that accountability factor has just been very interesting, because we have to say stuff that is true, but we also have to test out new ideas as we're talking. So
for sure,
it's an interesting balance. And so I look forward to that. And I also look forward to hopefully influencing the way that you think, recognizing the complexity, seeing that you don't know that much, and then getting you to focus on asking more and more questions. I feel like when that flip switches in your head, I feel like life becomes way more interesting, exciting, useful, and meaningful. It's way more worthwhile. You learn so much more. You grow way more. So I hope that as we talk about these things, that you can be influenced, and you can just start thinking in these terms. Because I was blind to all of these ideas until maybe a year or two ago, and just it's truly changed who I am. So I encourage you guys to start thinking about these ideas, and honestly message us. And if you want to talk with us on the podcast, let me know. But yeah, so that's pretty much it for the first episode.
It's good. I think it kind of outlines, well, it's not the first episode, but
sure,
the first Nathan Wenke episode.
There you go.
But I think it kind of outlines where we want to go to a certain degree, and that, more importantly, the framework by which we want to get there, because that's very important. And I'm sure we'll get into many other things about both you and me and our lives individually at a later time. But hopefully, I gave a bit of a introduction to who I am. So no, it was good. It's good. I don't really have anything else to say necessarily. So, well, thanks for having me on.
Thank you, Nate. Yeah. It's a good talk as always.
Always.
I'll see you in the next one.
Sure.
If you guys made it to the end of the video, I just want to say thank you so much for your time and energy that you used watching or listening to this. I really appreciate it. If you found this conversation meaningful, share it with your friends. Give me a like on YouTube, subscribe, follow me on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, give me a rating. I really appreciate it. Word of mouth is how I'm going to spread this, and if you found it useful, tell all your loved ones, because I bet they'll find it useful too. Thank you so much for your time, and you have a great rest of your day. Bye-bye.